Hi, welcome to Module 4. In this presentation, we will have a discussion on the comparative features of the major parts of the respiratory system. At the end of this module, each student should be able to compare the morphology of the nose, compare the number and arrangement of the tracheal rings, compare the lobation of the lungs, and finally identify the different air sacs of a bird. As we learn from the gross anatomy, the respiratory system is essential for gaseous exchange between air and blood. The system is provided with organs to perform this particular function, and they can be divided into upper and lower respiratory tract. The respiratory organs located within the head, that includes the nose, the paranasal sinuses, and the nasopharynx, are termed as the upper respiratory tract, while the lower respiratory tract consists of the larynx, the trachea, and the lungs. The cranial end of the larynx serves as the boundary between the upper and the lower respiratory tract. With few comparative notes on the nasal plane, arrangement of the trachealis muscle, and the lobation of the lungs, the structures of the respiratory system are almost the same among domestic mammals. However, there is one big modification in the birds, which is the addition of air sacs. In this module, we will compare and describe the organs of the respiratory system with emphasis on their major morphological feature. Let us begin with the nose. The nose in the broad sense comprises the external nose, the paired nasal cavities, and the paranasal sinuses. Some may be argued for also including the nasopharynx. An external nose, such as seen in the human face, is hardly to be recognized in the domestic animals, in which it is merged with the general contours of the muzzle. Technically, the apex of the nose and the rostral portion of the mandible and the maxilla forms the muzzle. The form and the size of the muzzle and the nature of the integument show considerable species differences. The integument around the nostrils is hairless and sharply demarcated from the unmodified skin in all domestic mammals other than the horse, where the unmodified skin with some tactile hairs surrounds the nostrils. Variation also exists with regards to the shape of the nostrils. The shape is considerably dictated by the nasal cartilage. Now let us check the appearances of the external nose of each domestic animals. Let us begin with the dog. The dog has what we call the planum nasale. It has a philtrum which continues ventrally to divide the upper lip. The surface is mostly wet as it is moistened by the secretion of the lateral nasal gland. The surface of the nasal plate has numerous fine grooves as shown here, the pattern of which is thought to be individual and may be useful as means of identification similar to the fingerprints in humans. The surface of the planum nasale of cats is smaller compared to the dog. It is also moistened by the secretion of the lateral nasal gland. Philtrum is also present, but not as distinct as in the dog. In pigs, instead of the planum nasale, it is called planum rostrale. They have an oval-shaped nostrils and they lack the philtrum as shown here. In large ruminants, the nasal plane and the upper lip is fused, forming the planum nasolabiale. They have oval-shaped nostrils and they also lack the distinct philtrum. In contrast, small ruminants, like in the goat, has a deep and extended philtrum. The nostril is shaped like a narrow slit. Unlike to all, horse lacks the distinct nasal plane. It consists of normal skin covered with a coat of short hair interspersed with tactile hair. It has a semilunar shaped nostrils and has a false nostril called nasal diverticulum. They also lack the philtrum. Here is the mentioned nasal diverticulum or the false nostrils in horses. This is a dorsal passage through the horse nostril into a blind cutaneous pouch. In birds, the external nares is located at the base of the beak. They are overhung by a horny flap called operculum, as in the case of the pigeon, or surrounded by the thick cere, as in cetacean birds. Next, we move to the larynx. As we recall, the larynx is composed of 4 cartilages: the epiglottic, the arytenoid, the thyroid, and the cricoid cartilage. All are unpaired except for the arytenoid cartilage. There are no major differences except for the appearances per species. For example, the apex of the epiglottic cartilage is pointed in dogs and in horses as shown here, but it is more rounded in ruminants and in pigs. Unlike mammals, the bird's larynx is composed only of the paired arytenoid, cricoid, and a procricoid cartilage. Here is an in situ arrangement of the larynx of birds and a horse for comparison. Then we move to the trachea. The trachea extends from the cricoid cartilage of the larynx to its bifurcation. As a review, it consists of a series of C-shaped hyaline cartilages connected by ligaments. The number of the tracheal cartilages varies among species. It is around 48 to 60 in large animals like horses and ruminants, 29 to 36 in pigs, around 42 to 46 in dogs, and 38 to 43 in cats. In birds, it can reach up to 120 rings depending on the species. First, we can compare the trachea based on the location of the trachealis muscle as shown here. All are located inside the tracheal rings except for the dogs. Also, we can compare them based on the opposition of the tracheal rings. In ruminants, they oppose, forming a dorsal ridge at the thoracic region. Interestingly, in ruminants and in pig, a tracheal bronchus or epibronchus is present as shown here. This bronchus ventilates the cranial lobe of the right lung. In birds, the tracheal rings are complete cartilaginous circle joined by annular ligament. It can be palpated on the right side of the bird. A structure called syrinx is formed by the terminal part of the trachea and the first part of the primary bronchi. In chicken, the last 4 tracheal rings are considered to be part of the syrinx. The subsequent rings are incomplete and are joined at one or both ends to the pesulus located at the midline. Lungs can be compared based on the lobations. Please remember that the lobation was based on the presence of a secondary bronchus. As a general feature, let us recall the different lung lobes using the schematically drawn lungs of a dog. Take note that there are more lobes in the right than in the left. There are 2 lobes in the left lung and 4 lobes in the right lung. The left lung is divided into cranial and caudal lobes. The right lung is divided into cranial, middle, accessory, and caudal lobe. This is the generalized pattern of lung lobation. In dogs, the left cranial lobe is further subdivided into cranial part and caudal part as shown here. The same pattern is seen in cats and they have smaller lungs compared to the dogs. In ruminants, the same pattern is observed with some modifications. The left cranial lobe is also divided into cranial and caudal parts. In addition, the right cranial lobe is also divided into cranial and caudal parts. It has a tracheal bronchus ventilating the right cranial lobe. In pigs, the same pattern is seen in dogs with 2 lobes in the left and 4 lobes in the right. The left has cranial and caudal parts. Like the ruminants, they also have the epibronchus. In horses, the number of lobation is different. The left cranial lobe is undivided as opposed to most domestic animals. In addition, the middle or the cardiac lobe is missing. Thus, among domestic mammals, the horse has the least number of lung lobes. In birds, the left and the right lung are appositioned dorsally to the left and right of the vertebral column. The lungs are not divided into lobes. Deep impressions called costal sulci in the dorsomedial portion of the lung give rise to a distinct transverse segment called intercostal torus between the ribs. The ventral surface of the lungs is fused with the horizontal septum and contains openings that communicate with the air sacs. In addition to the respiratory system of birds, they have air sacs. These are deformable, plastic-like, thin-walled cavities attached to the lungs. They provide mechanical ventilation of the lungs by acting as bellows. The air sacs are fused by connective tissue to adjacent organs or muscles. In some sections, they may be covered by eserosa. By penetrating the bones, the air sacs also act to pneumatize the skeleton. Normally, there are 8 air sacs in domestic chicken as follows. These are the unpaired cervical air sac, the unpaired clavicular air sac, the paired cranial thoracic air sacs, the paired caudal thoracic air sacs, and the paired abdominal air sacs. And that ends our discussion on the comparative anatomy of the respiratory system.